Today we'll be looking at an important rhythm guitar technique that allows you to do this. So the thing we'll be talking about is muting. Muting employs the combination of techniques with both hands to make your playing sound a lot more precise and much more tight. Essentially what you're doing is you're eliminating any of the sloppiness between your chords and notes that you play. But rather than overwhelm you and show you all of these muting techniques at once, we are just going to focus in on one of them. And this is specifically learning how to apply and release pressure with our fretting hand. So what I was doing in that example is when I play that first chord, I want to stop it early before changing to the next chord to kind of create a staccato effect, right? And all I'm doing when I do that is releasing pressure. So just releasing the pressure after you've played a series of notes or chords might seem simple enough, but the technique itself is actually pretty challenging to get down, and that's because there's a lot of nuance to it. Because it's very easy when you release and apply pressure, especially quickly, to accidentally release too much and for your fingers to come away from the strings or to do so in an uneven manner, which just will make you sound sloppy. So how exactly should this feel on your fingers? Well, a really easy way to kind of practice this is actually by taking your hand off the fretboard altogether, and I'm gonna put my hand up in the air like this, and I'm gonna practice pinching and squeezing between each of my fingers, okay? But let's start with just our first finger. And what we're gonna do is we are going to apply pressure and we're gonna pinch like this, and I'm squeezing about as hard as I would squeeze when I'm putting pressure on the string to create a note. And then when I release, I'm not going to separate my fingers. I'm just going to release the pressure. And I'm just gonna work on this over and over. And the key is for this to happen in a few milliseconds, right? Being able to go from pressing quite hard to releasing instantly, disengaging those muscles altogether, and for your fingers to not separate. And you can do this with all your fingers. This is how it should feel when you're on the fretboard. And one of the keys here is not pressing too hard. And this is why it's so important when you're learning to play the guitar. A lot of guitar players, they will push very hard to make the note come through. The reality is, if your guitar is set up well, you don't actually have to push that hard to make the note come through. And so you need to be working on applying the least amount of pressure possible to still make the notes come through. This is important when it comes to building speed, along with the rhythm stuff that we're doing today as well. So once you feel comfortable with how it feels between your fingers and your thumb, we can take a look at the fretboard and we can start working on that. Now, the best way to kind of start with this is to just use one finger. So what we're gonna do is, let's just start with a single note. So I'm going to go right here with my first finger on the G string 5th fret. I'm gonna play that note. And I'm gonna play around with how much pressure I actually need to apply to make that note come through. Again, you don't wanna be squeezing too hard because it's just gonna make this technique more laborious. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work on releasing my pressure slowly at first, and listening to how the note stops ringing through. Now, if I release too quickly, we'll get that, which we don't want. What we want to do is, quickly is important because we want it to come off quickly, but we don't want to release too hard, right? We don't want our finger to fly away from the string. So we want to practice just applying that pressure and releasing that pressure, but just enough so that the string comes off of the fret, but your finger doesn't come off of the string, so it stays muted. And then once you get the hang of that, we can do the other fingers. Before you start moving into chords, I'd highly recommend just focusing on using one finger at a time, getting that feeling good. And then once you are ready, we can move on to a bigger chord shape. We can do something like a big bar chord like this, an A major bar chord. And we can practice releasing pressure from our entire hand and all our fingers at once, right? And if I release unevenly, it's not gonna sound as tight or clean. It's not always gonna be perfect, but the idea is that you're doing it quickly enough that no one would notice if they were listening. Now, this technique goes hand in hand with pretty much anything that you play on the guitar, lead guitar stuff, rhythm guitar stuff. It's all important. I think it's most useful early on for rhythm guitar playing. So when you start to get into smaller chord shapes like triads, playing those ones, like what I was doing in the intro there, going between those, learning how to do that with just a smaller group of fingers, right? And that's how you get that little staccato sound. I'm just immediately pushing down and then releasing that pressure so that it immediately mutes the strings. And I'm actually muting up here to make sure I'm not hitting any extra strings as well. Don't worry about that as you're learning the technique. Once you get good at it, you can start doing the extra muting too. We just want to work at one muting technique at a time. That's very important. So obviously this works as a really great way to cut off and create space in between your chord changes. So if you intentionally want that chord to just come through for a second, or if you don't want anything ringing out as you transition from one shape to another, that's something that is super important. A lot of people have sloppy chord changes. So being able to, before changing, right? That's gonna stop any extra strings from ringing through and any buzzing or anything like that. If you feel like you're struggling with this technique at all, I'd highly recommend just going back to the beginning and working on just this between your fingers. I mean, even when you're going for a walk or you're sitting and watching TV, whatever you wanna do in your leisure time, you can work on applying that pressure and just getting used to how it feels to be able to quickly apply and release without those fingers coming apart. And then if you want your guitar in your hands, you can just work on doing it on the fretboard like this. You don't even have to play anything with your right hand. Just work on bouncing that finger down into a little chord or a single note and then back up without releasing the strings all together, just like that. Once you find yourself getting the hang of what's going on down here, the next challenge is learning how to sync your right hand up. So you would essentially want to make sure that you are strumming at the same time that you are pushing down. It's very easy to miss time, right? I press too early and then I release and then I just get muted strings, or the other way around. It's something that's really easy to do. So it's gonna take you some time once you get the left hand side down to be able to incorporate that right hand and get it perfect. But I would suggest doing something like what I just did when you feel ready, which is essentially just working on one shape at a time. I like this little shape here. And just going, I'm muting these extra strings, but just going. If I wasn't doing the mute properly, it would sound like this. Right? It would sound inconsistent. The idea is just to get it consistent. If you want to learn some more important rhythm guitar techniques, I'd highly recommend you click on the video you're seeing in the middle of your screen now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.